Hello and welcome. I'm Jenny Hall. Thanks for joining me for another card making tutorial. Today I'm going to be creating with the Cambridge Carols stamp set. This is a new and fun stamp set that is available from the Stampin' Up! Holiday catalog. It has classic images that really remind me of something like in the 1800 Victorian era. It's really vintage looking, and I love these open, drawn, lined images. So when I first saw this particular stamp set, what came to mind was a classic Christmas puzzle. Do you have any puzzle lovers in your life? I certainly do. And I'm going to recreate the look of a Christmas puzzle on a Christmas card. Doesn't that sound fun? So here is a look at the stamp set. I know there's a little bit of a glare, but we'll take another better look at it. And I'm pairing this up with the Puzzle Pieces Thinlits dies. And we're going to be using this large die here. And that large die is going to be embossed. So we'll get to use the Big Shot and use our embossing mats to go along with this as well. Let's get started. Here's another look at the Puzzle Pieces Thinlits die. This particular die measures 3.5 inches on each side. So I'm going to create a square card as that will keep with the feel. I have a piece of thick Whisper White cardstock, and this measures 3 5/8. That way it'll be just slightly larger than this particular piece than the die. And then my card base is going to be 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. Then it'll be this nice little square design that I'll feature this image. Now this image is going to hang over just a little bit, but we'll be able to get enough of it on there. We might be able to get it all. And then we'll do some treatment to this particular paper with the embossing dies. Here's another look at this beautiful stamp set, and it's a clear mount stamp set called Cambridge Carols, and this is the image we'll be using. So I'm going to use crumb cake ink, as this is going to have a vintage feel. And I'll stamp this knowing that my horizontal line is going to go this way. I'll stamp it in this manner and try to get as much of the stamp on my paper. I believe that this stamp set must have been designed to be able to work perfectly on this size. There are a few ways to add color to a basic panel of Whisper White cardstock. I'm using the watercolor assortment number 1 to just add some very basic light color strokes. And the watercolor pencil does not have to be activated. So anything that I see might have just a tinge of brown, I'm going to add some very light brown scribbles. I'll add a little bit of brown to their clothing too. That'll give us that vintage look that's going to carry over. Looks like we've got some background pieces here. And then I'll move on to gray. I want this to remain a vintage look. It doesn't need to carry a strong amount of color. And so just adding something as simple as just the hint of color is going to be enough. And we've got a lot of neutral tones here. I'm just adding some very quick coloring, and then in the frozen pond, that's going to need to have some gray as well. So I'm just going to follow along those lines that are already drawn. and just add some hints of color. I'm going to concentrate more of that color where those lines are already drawn. And up on the snowbank. And then I'll come back around and work on their clothing. This one is Rich Razzleberry, so she'll have a very pretty purple dress, which would be keeping in with the Victorian clothing times. And I'll make it more dark around the edges to kind of give a little bit of a natural contour. And I can add the man's clothes with the black pencil. And with the colors that we've already gotten. He's got a cute little bowler hat too. And I know that for sure his pants would be black, so I can go a little heavier there. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to get as much easy color there as I can. And then I'll also use the black here on the edges of the buildings and in those shadow areas just to get a little bit more definition. And what I'm doing is enhancing those lines that were already created by the artist. Now this looks like it could be a tree line, so I will add some yellows and greens. And again, I'm just doing very quick scribbles because this is not going to need to hold up. I'm going to emboss over this, and so it will change it up just a bit. Things will kind of tend to evolve. So I'm going to add a few tinges of green to the tree. Not that we would expect to have green during the winter time, but usually a little bit of green remains on a tree where I am. So I'm going to add just a little bit just to kind of bring things together. And again, this is not any particular techniques. I'm just kind of touching the little colors here and there on the paper. And I do have a white pencil, so I'm going to kind of do some scribbling with white. Particularly in these types of areas where I know that it's going to look like snow. And then here is, we have two different blues in this watercolor assortment, a darker and a lighter. And so the lighter blue is Bermuda Bay. I'm going to very lightly add tinges just so that it appears as if this is water that's frozen. So very light tinges just to kind of give the illusion that we know that this is frozen water. And then we have the darker that can go in very, very lightly into those areas that are a little bit more recessed. And it will tell the brain that this is an area of kind of give an impression. There we go. And then I'll have to do the same thing here very lightly for the snow, because snow might be white, but the shadow shaded areas are not white. So just tinges of blue. And again, these are all going to be masked over by some of that embossing that we're going to add. And just a little bit more gray. And I'll add more concentrated gray into those areas that are more recessed. This is a blender pen, and what it does is it melts the coloring down into the paper. And I'm going to use some very fine strokes just to kind of activate some of the areas. I don't want the paper to really get wet, but I do want to activate some of the colors. It's not going to take away all of the brush strokes either. it'll just even out my coloring, so that now their clothing actually doesn't look like it has pencil marks. And I'll do the same here to these snowbanks, and it's just going to kind of give a little bit of a hint, just a glow of color. And because this is going to end up being a puzzle, then we want to not distract away from the puzzle either. Very quick. And this is going to stick with that vintage look. That's the one thing we can do with coloring on thick Whisper White paper, is it holds up nicely because we're not adding a lot of fluid. To give the paper more of a vintage distressed feel, I'm going to add some sponging with gray granite and Sahara sand. And I have here just a section of a Stampin' sponge that I can use for either color. So first I will dab my sponge off to get the first initial contact of that heavy concentration of color, and I'll go around the edges. A circular motion will work fine, or you can work in any direction that you feel comfortable in. And remember, we are going to make this look like a puzzle piece. So this is just going to kind of enhance that vintage feel. And then moving on to Sahara sand, add a little bit of it here too. Especially around the edges, because this is going to be mounted onto a white card base. I would like to see the edges kind of form a sort of a border. That way they will help the eye to be able to see where the edge of the puzzle piece is, the edge of the puzzle panel, versus the card base. So this is why it wasn't important for us to do very detailed and planned coloring, because this is going to really be distressed. So the last thing I'm going to do is make sure I go around all four sides and be sure that I've got those side edges really colored. And here is a card base in comparison so that I can see that yes, it does definitely carry the color around the edges. These are the Big Shot embossing mats, and they come in a package with 3 pieces and paper instructions. It's very important to save these paper instructions, because they will tell you exactly how to prepare your sandwich in order to be able to use it with the die cuts. So this is an emboss only sandwich, as you can see here, and it tells me, if I refer back to the diagrams, exactly what to use. Following the directions, it has told me that I need to use the white impressions pad with the blue mat. This is the order it says to go in. Then I'll use my piece of paper, and I will use my die, and I'm going to go ahead and center that. It uses a standard cutting plate. This one's quite used. And then my Big Shot platform. And this is all in reverse order so that I can lay it upside down. So I'll center that particular die and hold it together, making sure that I don't allow it to move. And this is the emboss only sandwich. So now I will run this through the machine. One time. We'll come back here to see how well it worked. I can always make another pass if needed. but I don't think we need it because I can see those puzzle pieces just perfectly. Because I want these cut edges to lay down, I'm using my bone folder and encouraging these cut edges to kind of go back down flat. But I do want the puzzle pieces to stay up, although if I need to, I can just run them along this way. And across the back. And it did make a really good impression. I'm very pleased with how that worked out. This panel can now be adhered directly down to the card base. I'm using snail adhesive. And I'm really pleased with how this has created its own type of a border. It looks like it has an additional border, and there's no extra paper, and that's going to help this go through the mail really nicely. I'm going to add some rich raspberry velvet ribbon, and this is going to echo the color that is inside on her dress. And this can just be added anywhere on the card. I'm going to try it out first around the top. And I feel like this velvet ribbon gives a really nice touch of the Victorian look. If you'd like for the ribbon to stay in place, then a little bit of snail adhesive underneath this nice wide ribbon will help it lay down. And that will also encourage people, whoever receives this card, to be able to touch it and feel that velvet ribbon. And velvet is such a nice texture. So I'm going to try to get this to lay down as best I can, knowing that velvet ribbon tends to have a mind of its own. And just do the best with a bow. And then I'll trim off some of the extra. Almost as an afterthought, I had the idea that I can create a fun way to add a sentiment to the front of the card. So with the Season's Greetings stamp and gray granite ink, I'll stamp this. And then I'm going to create a side flap that will allow the card to hold the sentiment here. And I will use my bone folder. I've never done it this way before, but it seems like it would be something that would work out. So we're going to try it. And I'm going to hold it up against this line here that has the puzzle pieces and mark where I'm going to fold this. This is just going to make things a little more interesting. And then I can attach it in two different ways. I can attach it from the side to where this is on the inside, or I can cut this down and just have it be attached from the front of the card, and there won't have anything show on the inside. So I think that's what I'll try so far. So I'm cutting away part of that little flap, and then I'll add a good amount of snail adhesive. And I'm going to line this up with the edge here. So there should be just enough to be able to line up along this edge of the puzzle and have it be on the card base. Yeah, there we go. How about that? I hope you guys like that. And then I'll use my bone folder to just push it in place. And then it opens up right here to reveal the little skaters. On the inside of the card, I'll stamp the large word greeting in the same crumb cake ink that we started off with at the beginning of our project. Line it up at the top area. And then use the image of the ice skates in the bottom corner. This is going to carry that vintage look through. And now I'm going to just use a little bit of snail adhesive this time, which is not typical for me. Add this to the inside of the card, and we're complete. This is a Victorian styled puzzle. It has a vintage look, but it still carries enough of that white space through. Thank you for spending time to craft with me today. I really like how this card shaped up and how it has the fun little flap on the side to reveal the images underneath. Thank you for spending time with me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Trip. Thanks for watching the video. See you next time.